19 nurses fled the palace in fear, but the 20th, an American nurse named Stella Briggs, did the one thing Sheikh Ahmad Khalid swore nobody would ever dare. She broke the forbidden rule, the rule even his family, his kingdom, and his closest advisor Yusuf had obeyed for 3 silent years. The moment she crossed that line, the palace turned against her. The council moved to destroy her, and the billionaire Sheikh, cold, untouchable, feared by his own staff, did the unthinkable. He walked barefoot into an airport full of cameras, just to stop her from leaving. If you're ready to hear the truth behind the nurse who challenged a royal empire, if you want to know why a single name could shatter a dynasty, and how love survived power, tradition, and betrayal, like this video, subscribe right now, and comment the country you're watching from, because what you're about to hear will break your heart, and then put it back together again. The 3 nurses bolted through the palace gates like people running from a fire. One clutched her high heel and her dignity in the same hand. Another screamed into her phone about suing whoever employed her, and the third stopped under the marble portico, turned and whispered into the warm Riyadh air, "God help the next one." Stella Briggs adjusted the strap of her backpack, shoved her sunglasses up into her hair, and let the murmurs wash over her like background noise. She had heard the stories. Who hadn't? But stories lived in other people's mouths. Stella lived inside emergency rooms. She had seen fear that couldn't be fixed with speeches. She had seen people who needed a practical hand, a steady voice, and maybe one stubborn nurse who refused to call their pain hysteria or fragile. That was why she'd taken the job. That and the pay. Debt collectors didn't care about dignity. Fatima met her at the marble steps with a clipboard and a face that had exhausted hope into a permanent frown. For 20 years, Fatima kept schedules, smoothed tensions, and watched great houses swallow people whole. She looked Stella up and down as if measuring whether she'd be lunch or lifeline. "You're the American." Her smile was a practiced weapon, disarming but honest. Fatima didn't shake it. She handed an ID badge over like a warning. "Did you read the contract?" "I read it. The small print, too." Stella felt Fatima's gaze flick to her hands, to the worn band on her left wrist where an old hospital ID had once been clipped. "No suing the palace for psychological trauma." Stella chuckled. "Fair enough. I've signed worse." Fatima exhaled. "Listen, Miss Briggs. Sheikh Ahmed Khalid is complicated. He complains about food, about noise, about the color of the curtains. He fires people for asking the wrong question. 19 nurses in 4 months. We don't want scenes. Don't take things personally." Stella tucked the strap of her backpack under her arm and pushed open the carved doors that led to the hallways that felt older than time. Chandeliers spilled light over runners so white they might have been painted. The palace smelled like orange blossom and old grief. "He's on the 3rd floor. East wing," Fatima muttered. "Try not to stare. He doesn't like strangers looking at his face for too long." Stella grinned. "I stare at hearts more than faces." 3 knocks. An irritated voice barked, "Silence! Come in!" Fatima shoved the door open, made a quick gesture, and left as if every second she lingered might be a betrayal to some unspoken code. The suite was absurd, Meish. Silk curtains, a bed fit for a king, a balcony that looked out over a city of lights. And there, near the window, leaning on a silver cane like it was an old sword, was Sheikh Ahmad Khalid. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his jaw often set like carved stone. His eyes were dark storm water, sharp enough to hurt. He looked Stella up and down with the cool disdain of someone annoyed he had to begin the day at all. "You're the new one," he said, voice flat. "I'm Stella," she said, smiling with the easy confidence of someone who saw pain and knew how to treat it. "I'll be taking care of you." He squinted. "You won't last." The pronouncement landed like a judge's gavel. It had landed in the mouths of 19 before her. It was supposed to cow her. It didn't. "I've handled worse," Stella said. "You're dramatic." For the first time in a long while, a twitch at the corner of his mouth threatened a smile, and then collapsed back into silence. Ahmad took 2 steps toward her, cane scraping the marble, and something in the way his left shoulder bunched gave Stella a clue he was not simply cruel. He was in pain. "Leave," he ordered, soft and absolute. "If you're telling me to go, I'm telling you no," Stella replied. It came out more defiant than she'd meant. She shoved the clipboard she'd been handed into her bag. "I signed a contract. I need this job. So, Your Highness, I'm staying." He stared at her as if cataloging the audacity of the American species. Then he did something almost ridiculous for a man who seemed to have no... "Stupid question. Or lecture me about positivity." "Deal," Stella said, stepping forward and taking his hand. His palm was warm and trembled faintly. He let go with the care of someone handling a fragile thing. "Just so you know," she added as she released him, "I've seen scarier men whine about a fever. So relax, Your Highness. You don't intimidate me." He blinked. The corner of his mouth moved again, almost a smile, a small concession. Then the day began. Stella lasted exactly 17 hours before the first real test. At 6 the following morning, the silver bell next to the bed rang 3 times with the urgency of a war drum. Stella arrived at the door with a messy bun, uniform slightly rumpled, and a paper cup of coffee in her hand. "Good morning, Your Highness," she chirped. "Did you sleep well or spend the night planning how to torture me?" Ahmad was draped in pillows, the expression of a man who enjoyed a show. "Tea," he said simply. Mint tea, Stella learned, was not a casual request. It was a royal experiment in patience. He wanted the correct pot, the precise leaves, the exact temperature, 3 minutes of infusion. He smelled the cup she offered and declared it cold. She went back and tried again. He asked for sugar, then changed his mind. He demanded the schedule of his medication be reorganized simply because he wanted it done. "You just told me no," Stella said at one point, eyebrow cocked. "Technically, I said no with an all due respect in front of it," she grinned. 2 maids froze, whispering in Arabic that probably translated to, "She's getting fired in 3, too." But Ahmad did not fire Stella. He simply watched her as if trying to solve a puzzle that had resisted him for years. Later, as she arranged his medications with the precision of someone who'd seen how tiny mistakes led to catastrophes, Stella noticed something tucked between the pages of a shelf full of poetry. An old medicine bottle, faded label, expired date. She pulled another book and another bottle, until 7 small brown bottles sat like secrets on the marble. When Ahmed saw her with the pills, his reaction was immediate and fierce. "Put them back," he hissed. "Why?" Stella asked softly. "Are you still taking them?" He took the bottles from her hands, fingers closing too tight, knuckles white. I don't want them," he said. "I shouldn't need them." Stella watched his chest rise and fall. The tremor that stiffened his hands wasn't just arrogance, it was grief bundled up in control. "What's her name?" she asked before she could stop herself. He flinched like a child caught with a forbidden word on his lips. The word nearly died in his throat, but finally he whispered, "Amira." Silence filled the suite like a physical thing. Fatima's earlier warning echoed back in Stella's mind. Never mention her. The rule hovered between them like a live wire. Stella folded the pill bottles into a cloth, as if they were part of a patient's wound that needed cleaning. Ahmad's eyes pooled with something close to amazement. No one had promised him survival. No one had asked permission to try. Outside in the hallway, palace life continued, servants moving like chess pieces, hushed warnings being given and stored. But inside the suite, the rules had shifted ever so slightly. Stella had kept her job. She had waded into a grief that smelled like orange blossom and old books each. She had uttered a forbidden curiosity, and for the first time in a very long time had not been sent away. And far down the corridor, Yusuf, the palace advisor with hands that never shook but a heart that had learned terror, was making a note that would, in time, change all of their lives. What's about to come next? Stella's competence will win small victories, but when she finds more of Ahmad's hidden fragments, the palace will begin to push back hard. Don't forget, like, subscribe, and comment the city you're watching from if you're following them. The next moment will test loyalties. Stella folded the cloth over the 7 faded bottles and tucked them gently into the inner pocket of her bag, as if it were a surgical instrument that needed sterilizing, not a secret someone had been burying inside poetry. Ahmed watched her with a look that was part alarm and part relief, a man who'd been carrying a weight so long he'd forgotten it had a name. "Don't throw them away," he said, voice rough. "Not yet." She looked up. "We don't throw things away without understanding them first," she answered. "Tell me when you last took them." He closed his eyes, and the room shifted into a different kind of silence, the kind heavy with things people say only when the lights are off. "Months," he admitted. I can't. I promised myself I'd be stronger." "You're allowed to ask for help and still be strong," Stella said simply. "Strength isn't never needing a hand. It's being able to take one." He met her eyes then, and something small and hopeful flickered there, before he carefully tucked the bottles back into their hiding place. Trust wasn't instantaneous, but it was a start. The next morning settled into the suite with the usual battle of precision and protocol that ruled Ahmad's life. Stella had learned quickly the difference between medicine and ritual here. The mint tea had its own etiquette, the silver teapot its own social law. She moved through the routine with the same practical calm she used in busy ERs, check the IV lines, cross-reference the medication list, confirm doses, log the vitals. Nora, a quiet maid whose hands smoothed linens like she could iron out the past, brought in the breakfast tray and shot Stella a look that was part curiosity and part guarded approval. "She likes the teapot with the handle that faces east," Nora said under her breath, nodding toward Ahmad. "He believes it brings better flavor." "Is there a manual for that?" Stella whispered back, but Nora only smiled a thin smile and left. At Ahmad's side, Stella watched him sip his tea with exaggerated care and then set the cup down as if it contained a threat. "You're improving." "That's because I'm obedient." "Because I made you walk 10 minutes yesterday and you survived," Stella corrected. "You coughed and complained and walked like a man dragging an invisible anchor. But you did it." He inhaled, sat up straighter, and for a sliver of a second looked like a young man about to sprint instead of a ruler accustomed to being carried. It was a small victory, the kind she'd been trained to celebrate, and Stella celebrated it by handing him a new tray with 2 small pancakes because, she thought, emotional drama makes people hungry. He almost laughed at that. His chuckle was rusty and brief, but it sounded like life trying to clear its throat. Between meals, Stella reorganized the medication chart. The list on the bedside table had been assembled in haste. Duplicate entries, ambiguous times, injections scheduled too closely. It was a dangerous shorthand designed by people who were tired of thinking. She corrected the timings, wrote clear notes in neat block letters, and labeled the syringes in a way anyone in the suite could understand. Fatima had entrusted her with the job. Stella treated that trust like oxygen. Layla, a palace attendant with sharp cheekbones and a sharper tongue, wandered into the suite under the pretense of delivering a stack of freshly pressed robes. She lingered, folding a robe, watching Stella with a mixture of amusement and suspicion. "You make it sound like modern medicine is so simple," Layla said. "We have traditions here." "Traditions keep a lot of good things alive," Stella answered. "But sometimes they hide what's actually hurting people." She folded a gauze bandage and met Layla's eyes evenly. "We can have both. tradition, and care. Layla's expression softened for a heartbeat. "You are bold," she said. "Bold enough to make a man like him smile. That is dangerous." Stella shrugged. "Danger is part of the job." Night fell unexpectedly, as it always did, with a cathedral hush. Stella sat in the armchair by Ahmad's bed, reading the last pages of a nursing manual and letting her fingers trace notes on her tablet. Ahmad's breathing was steady. Moonlight painted the room in silver, and the city hummed faintly beyond the balcony. The first real panic attack came without warning. Stella woke to the metallic clack of the night bell and the sound of Ahmad's breath hitching, like someone trying to swallow a storm. He was at the edge of the bed, hands balled into the sheets, mouth open and unable to form a sound. "Stella," he gasped, not quite a call, more a plea. She moved without thinking the way she always did in emergencies, softly, directly, with hands ready to do what needed to be done. "Look at me," she said quietly, taking both his hands. "Breathe with me. In for 4, hold for 2, out for 6. 1, 2, 3. He followed, ragged at first, then slowing. She guided him through each breath as if the rhythm itself could steady the broken scales inside him. She passed. Ahmad's face was pale and slick with sweat. For a long moment, he was only a man curled around old grief, and Stella sat with him like a guard who had been walking alongside a wounded soldier all night. "You can't always hold it in," she told him gently. "You trying to be brave all the time isn't strength. It's exhaustion." He swallowed. "I don't want pity." "This isn't pity," she said. "This is tools. Breathing is a tool. Walking is a tool. Trusting someone is also a tool, if you let it be." He laughed, a small broken thing. "You speak like a healer, not a visitor." "Because I am a healer," she said, and the word hung in the room like a simple map, a place to go. The next day she found another oddity. While straightening Ahmad's study, a book shoved too far back on the shelf caught her eye. When she pulled it free, a narrow hollow had been carved inside the spine. Someone had hidden things there before. Inside lay 3 more brown bottles, dusty and marked with faded pharmacy labels. Her fingers went cold. Before she could react, the door clicked, and Ahmad was there. His face had gone taut in an instant, protective and terrified all at once. "Not those," he said, reaching for the bottles with almost frantic hands. "Tell me about them," Stella said, keeping her voice steady. She had learned how to converse with fear before. Ask, don't assume. Listen, don't judge. He set the bottles down as if they might explode. "They're what kept me able to sleep for a time after she—" His voice stopped, and he looked away, refusing to say the name. Stella felt the room tilt. "You don't have to hide this from me." He closed his eyes. "There are rules." "What rules?" she asked. "The name," he said through clenched teeth. "You don't say it. You don't mention her. Not aloud." Stella would have laughed if the laugh hadn't been so close to a sob. It was ridiculous and tragic all at once. A rule meant to protect had become a prison. The bottles were not the enemy. Silence was. "Why?" she asked, soft and fierce. "Because people," he said, voice small, "think speaking it makes the wound bleed again. They think if the name dies, maybe I'll follow it." Stella set the bottles on the table like a clinician laying out instruments. "Names don't kill memories. They give them shape. You are not less for remembering. You are human." He looked at her, and the armor around him cracked. "Her name was Amira," he said finally, as if admitting it out loud might topple the world. For a second she saw the woman, not in a photograph, but in the edges of Ahmad's grief. How he flinched at certain songs, how he kept an empty cup that he never used. How he kept a room lit with a small lamp long after night had come. Saying the name did not make the palace collapse. Saying it made the air move. Outside the suite, palace life carried on. Servants whispered about visitors that would be arriving soon. Noble families carrying bouquets and expectations. Women with silk and practiced smiles who would stand in the palace and do their best to become solutions to a grief they did not understand. Stella tucked the bottles back into the carved hollow and closed the book carefully. She felt more certain than she had when she'd first walked through the palace gates. This was not a place to fix in a day, but it was a place where steady hands and steady words could change the rules. As she turned off the lamp and watched Ahmad's breathing settle, she thought of the visitors coming, of Layla's warning that being the cause of a smile here was dangerous. She positioned herself where a nurse belongs, at the edge of a person's pain, ready to stand and to stay. What's about to come next? Strangers will begin to thread themselves into the palace's life. Women with ambitious families, and men with quiet designs, and the council will start to murmur about propriety, protection, and the danger of forging attachments. Don't forget, if you're with Stella and Ahmad, like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from. The world outside the suite is about to press in. The palace woke early, as if on cue, to ceremony and the clinking of fine porcelain. Word moved through the corridors on soft feet and feathered skirts. Guests had arrived. Stella heard the whispering before she saw the procession, low voices, the rustle of silk, the metallic click of heels on marble. Fatima appeared at the doorway with a look that mixed apology and calculation. "Today's a formal tea," she said. The council asked for it. Rashid invited a few families. Protocol must be observed. Stella straightened her uniform and smoothed the crease from her sleeve. She had learned in the first months that palace life ran on a double track, what the mouth said and what the hands did. The hands were where people proved what they meant. The drawing room filled like a garden in a storm. Layla, always impeccably made up, took the center seat with aristocratic ease. Nora, quieter but sharp-eyed, hovered near the tray of sweets. Other women in pale colors murmured behind fans. They were all polished, practiced smiles. Brides-in-waiting shaped as solutions to family problems. Each carried a mother's or uncle's hope folded into the hem of her gown. Rashid entered like a man bearing a task, not the delighted brother, but an organizer of futures. He greeted Ahmad with a quick, formal kiss on the cheek, and then swept his eyes toward Stella as if making inventory. The air tightened. Stella felt the looks like measurement tools, how she stood, how she smiled, how unthreatening she seemed to the world that measured people by lineage and possession. "Thank you all for coming," Rashid said smoothly. "We wanted a calm gathering, tea, conversation, introductions. Ahmad, perhaps you'd like to welcome our guests." Ahmad's response was thinly masked as he eased back into the cushions. "Welcome," he said, voice even. Stella's presence at the head of the room, practical binder in hand, smart and too direct for the air, pulled at the fabric of the event. When a matronly woman began to explain the genealogy of a certain prospect, Stella interrupted politely. "Excuse me, but what matters most is that Ahmad's needs come first. Who among you understands caregiving? Who will be there when panic strikes at 3 a.m? A silence dropped that felt like birds flying from a tree. The matron's smile stiffened, and Layla's eyes flashed with something between amusement and thin ice. "We understand traditions," she said with the soft menace of someone who had learned to protect her own future by shredding other people's hesitations. Stella only inclined her head. "Traditions are important," she said, "but tradition doesn't equal care. Grief doesn't care for protocol." The comment rippled. Someone near the back coughed politely. A servant rearranged a ribbon. Ahmad watched the exchange with unreadable calm, and Rashid's jaw tightened in a way that made Stella's chest constrict. Yusuf, sitting slightly apart with a neat ledger and an expression like a man cataloging risks, made a small note in the margin of his paper. His hand was steady, his eyes were not. He had been keeping records since Stella arrived, small, efficient entries that marked changes in protocol, deviations, influences. Stella's brashness would be a line on his page. Conversation shifted to lighter things, horses, philanthropic initiatives, a new school being funded by a cousin. But under the polite chatter ran another current. Who would be suitable? Who would preserve the dynasty? Who would not create future problems? Stella's presence, her medical voice and insistent welfare-first comments, had already made her a problem in the mouths of the comfortable. Later, when the women were shown out with the grace of practiced tigers, Layla leaned toward Rashid and whispered something that made his shoulders relax, only a fraction. Nora, watching Stella with something like hesitance, murmured, "She doesn't understand how fragile he is." Her tone held not contempt, but a softer, protective dread. That afternoon, Stella found Ahmad alone on the balcony, looking over the city as if trying to locate something that had slipped away. The sun caught at the edges of his jaw and turned the cane's silver into a flash. He looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. "You handled that well," Ahmad said, surprising her. "I handled the obvious," Stella answered. "It's the hidden things that do the damage." He turned to her. For a moment, he looked not like a ruler, but like a man who had been asked to be brave over and over, and was tired of the cost. "You were blunt," he said. "Dangerously blunt." "I was honest," she replied. "If we keep pretending everything is fine for the sake of a family's image, he never heals." He closed his eyes, and Stella could see him blink hard against a memory. "You sound like someone who knows what grief is." "I do." Her voice softened without meaning to. "I've carried he said, half tease, half accusation. "You are my patient," she said. "You can be the Sheikh outside, and you can be the man in here. I'll help both." He reached and brushed a hand against hers, not a command, not a claim, just a touch. The contact sent a small, dangerous current through them both, close enough to feel the heat of the skin beneath the silk cuff, and no space between their breaths. They leaned toward each other as if two magnets might finally let go of the force that had kept them still. For a tilt of a second, the world narrowed to the space between their faces. Stella's throat tightened. Ahmad's gaze dipped, a question in it that mirrored her own. A footstep on the marble, sharp and official, broke the moment. Rashid's voice carried from the hall. "Ahmad, we need to discuss the calendar for the council." The spell broke. Ahmad sat back, composed instantly, the borrowed dignity of authority like an armor he could slip into at will. "Duty," he murmured, the word a blade. Stella watched the way he wore his duty like armor and felt an ache as if someone had given her the map to a city and forbidden her to enter. Their near kiss lived now in the small gestures that followed, the way he allowed her hand to rest on the arm of his chair a beat longer, the way she arranged his blanket even when he told her not to. That evening, Yusuf came by the suite under the pretext of checking the schedule. He moved with the slow efficiency of a man who kept lightning from falling on delicate things. He bent slightly in respect, then fixed his eyes on Stella with the cool appraisal of someone auditioning a variable for long-term risk. "You have a tension," Yusuf said, surprisingly conversational. "For improving outcomes. The Sheikh sleeps better, the staff reports fewer emergencies. These are good signs." "Thank you," Stella answered. She sensed the compliment had a double edge. "But you speak freely," Yusuf continued, "in ways that might," he chose his words carefully, "disturb established expectations." Stella kept her expression neutral. "If I disturb expectations but reduce panic attacks, I'll accept the disturbance." Yusuf's lips pressed into a thin line. "Protection takes many forms," he said. "Sometimes it means keeping a man from making choices that might bring him harm." Stella's laugh was brittle. Are you suggesting I'm a harm to him?
No, Yusuf said. I'm suggesting change is risky. The palace is a web of balances. Some things that seem like kindnesses can pull threads that damage the whole.
Or they can repair the whole, Stella said.
Yusuf nodded.
But the ledger in his hand found the back page, and he made a discreet mark. Whatever he was plotting, it belonged to the kind of care that used lists and votes and quiet persuasion rather than pulses and breaths. Stella felt the weight of it like an approaching storm. That night, she lay awake longer than usual, thinking about what it meant to be useful in an environment where kindness... At least not at first. It would be the system. Whispers, small complaints, coordinated concerns. Outside in the palace corridors, whispers turned into planning. Rashid met with elders and spoke of protection and of the need for a suitable union. Yusuf updated his notes. Layla and her circle adjusted the order of suggested visits. The palace, suddenly aware of a ripple, readied the net. Stella slept with the window slightly open, listening to the city breathe. Ahmed's quiet breathing beside her, a sound she'd come to recognize like a rhythm in a long piece of music, reminded her of the fragile balance she had to guard. He had asked her to stay. She had chosen to. The choice was now a spark in dry grass. What's about to come next? The palace will move from subtle pressure to formal action. A dossier will be prepared, accusations framed, and the council will convene to decide whether a foreign nurse is a blessing or a peril. If you're on their side, now's the time to like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, because soon the quiet will become a storm, and Stella and Ahmed will have to choose what they're willing to fight for. The morning after the balcony conversation felt charged, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Stella moved through the suite with practiced calm, but even she sensed the seam in the palace, somewhere invisible, that had been pinched too tight. Servants glanced at her with forced neutrality. Nora avoided her eyes. Layla's smile had a blade. The knock came quietly, but its timing was precise. Dr. Kamal entered with the slow economy of a man who had sworn to measure life by facts and charts, not by feeling. He was the chief physician, the author of Ahmed's official treatment plans, and a man who had built his career on controlled outcomes. Where Stella saw possibility, he often saw risk. "Stella," he said, removing his glasses and folding them into his hands. "May we speak in private?" She set down her clipboard and followed him into the modest consultation room adjoining the suite. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and roses, a compromise between hospital and palace. "You've been implementing non-traditional interventions," Dr. Kamal began without preamble. "Breathing exercises, unsanctioned walks, emotional dialogues. These are unorthodox for our protocols." Stella braced. She expected objections, but the tone, careful, official, carried the weight of a warning. "They're evidence-based," she said. "Breathing reduces sympathetic nervous system activation. Movement prevents deconditioning. Talking decreases isolation, which itself is a risk factor for depression and panic." Dr. Kamal's face remained unreadable. "We have a system here. Protocols are designed for consistency and safety. Unsupervised, variable practices can risk instability. The palace cannot be governed by improvisation." "I'm not improvising." He nodded, then folded his hands like someone closing an argument he'd already rehearsed. "That will be discussed. There have been complaints." "Complaints?" The word tasted like iron. "From whom?" Dr. Kamal looked away. "From staff, from concerned families. There are rumors about closed doors, extended vigils, and impropriety." Stella felt the room tilt. "You mean the night I checked his vitals and stayed until his breathing slowed?" The night his panic attack peaked? He did not answer. The omissions spoke loudly. Their quiet caregiving, intimate, necessary, could be dressed as dishonor with the right witnesses. Outside, the palace hummed with orchestrations. Yusuf, quietly efficient, had been coordinating. What at first seemed like suspicion had deepened into intent. He had begun to gather phrases, testimonies, small incidents. No single line damning, but threaded together they formed a pattern that could be read by a council as unacceptable. The first sting came the following week when a minor staged incident unfolded like a rehearsed scene in a play. Someone left the midnight door closed. A maid, coached gently and given a story that sounded plausible, remembered seeing Stella inside the suite after hours. The maid's voice had been trembling when she reported it, and someone in the guardroom had nodded with grave concern. It was the sort of thing that could be true and false at once. Stella had indeed been in the suite. She'd been checking vitals, responding to a bell. But the narrative crafted around it emphasized privacy breached, doors closed, opportunity seized, an interpretation, not a fact. In a court of image, perception was evidence. Word traveled quickly to Dr. Kamal and to Yusuf. The ledger in Yusuf's hand grew weightier with each passing day. A line here about a door closed at midnight. A line there about an emotional attachment witnessed by staff who had been encouraged to notice. Fatima, who had been kind beneath her polish, stopped meeting Stella in private. Even Nora's eyes, previously warm in their guarded way, now flicked to the corridor and away. When Yusuf presented the first dossier to the council, he did so with the quiet precision of a man delivering a verdict in small, articulate pieces. He sat before 7 men, cloths of state draped across their chairs, faces trained to unreadability, and laid the evidence down like a physician presenting a pathology report. "Unorthodox care leads to risk," Yusuf said, voice steady. "We have documented deviations from protocol. We have witnesses who report closed doors after curfew. We have concerns about the Sheikh's emotional stability and the risk of foreign influence." The council members, who had been watching like weathered judges, murmured among themselves. Rashid, present but restrained, did not interject at first. Ahmed sat with an expression. Council. The walk down the grand corridor toward the chamber felt long and ceremonial, as if every tile remembered someone's downfall. Servants bowed, their eyes avoiding her. Fatima's hand brushed her sleeve as she passed, a fleeting contact that felt like an apology. The heavy doors of the council chamber opened, and Stella stepped into a room designed for verdicts. The 7 men sat like a U, their faces older by lines that had been carved in the service of power. In the center, Yusuf's papers lay neat and assured. Dr. Kamal stood to explain medical concerns. Rashid's silence was heavy with calculation. Ahmad sat with his hands folded, a man who looked as if a battle had just been called on his behalf, and he had not been invited to fight. "You are accused," Rashid began, voice urbane and precise, "of violating professional boundaries, of fostering an attachment with the Sheikh that runs counter to the dignity of his position, and the stability of the palace." Stella's voice felt small in the chamber. "I am a nurse," she said. "I am here to provide care." Yusuf steepled his fingers. "Care in private, perhaps. But when doors close at midnight, and when staff are instructed to keep silence, we must ask ourselves, what is professional care, and what is a relationship in the making?" Dr. Kamal presented his chart with the authority of someone who had been taught to trust numbers above people. "We have documented changes in protocol initiated without sign-off from the medical board. We have statements from staff, coerced perhaps, but statements that indicate the presence of prolonged private sessions." Stella felt the room constrict. They had words ready that could transform tenderness into scandal. When she attempted to explain, the momentum carried the other way. "You cannot fabricate evidence of professionalism in the face of witness testimony," one councilman said. "The image alone is damage. Our duty is to the office that governs this throne." A younger council member, sympathetic even in his youth, asked quietly, "Has any harm come to His Highness?" Ahmed's mouth drew a thin line. "No," he said. He faltered, then forced himself forward. "He is improving." There was a pause, as if everyone in the room held their breath to measure whether the truth might alter the course of the argument. Ahmad cleared his throat and looked toward Stella, eyes catching on hers like two lights that had shared a short, intense flare. "This is not simply about policy," he said, voice low but carrying. "She saved me. She has kept me from losing myself." Yusuf's face was a study in controlled concern. "We appreciate your gratitude, Your Highness, but governance requires that we consider long-term stability. Emotional entanglement can cloud judgment." The tenor of debate shifted deeper. It was one thing to discuss deportation hearings. Stella felt the air leave as though a great bell had tolled. The word suspension was clinical. It tasted like humiliation. She had expected resistance. She had not expected being weighed and found wanting in a room where influence mattered more than evidence. She was escorted from the chamber, not by guards in force, but by protocols that moved like oil, gentle, unavoidable, and smooth in their cruelty. In the hallway, whispers followed her like a breeze. Layla's face passed by in a blur of silk and practiced consolation. Back in her small room, Stella sat on the edge of a bed and exhaled. The furniture around her seemed suddenly theatrical, as if every cushion were a judge's cushion. Fatima came in quietly and placed a folded paper on the dresser. "I'm sorry," she said. "There were things I couldn't say." "What things?" Stella asked. Fatima looked at her, eyes softening. "I saw what you did at night. I know you were doing your job, but the palace is complicated. People are scared of change." Stella folded her hands. "Is there no recourse? Evidence?" Fatima's expression was weary. "You will get a hearing. Until then, you are technically suspended. The process will go slowly, in part to ensure nothing rash happens. But know this. Your work is not gone from his body. He sleeps better. He walks. He breathes differently." Stella pressed her fingers to the paper Fatima had left. It was a letter of small gratitude, weighted and honest, passed like contraband. It would not stop the machine, but it would remind her that she had done what she came to do. The news of the suspension rippled outward. Staff rooms buzzed with new versions of the incidents. Social retellings painted Stella as a foreign interloper who had overstepped, an intruder in the palace's sacred silence. Nora's eyes, when they met Stella's in the corridor after the council, were full of something like apology and fear. Ahmad found her later, in the quiet that followed storm. He entered the room and closed the door with a soft thud that sounded final. For a moment, the man did what rulers rarely do in public. He was raw and dangerously human. "They want you gone," he said simply, voice steady because he was holding a decision within his chest. Stella swallowed. "They can try." He took a step closer and for once did not put on armor. "If they remove you, I will resign." The gravity of the words hit them both. It was not a threat of storm, but of a silent exodus. A man willing to walk away from his throne rather than lose what was healing him. "You can't do that," she said. "You have responsibilities." They will watch me break again if I leave you," he said. "I won't let them decide what healing looks like for me." Stella's heart pushed against her ribs. He was asking her to be the center of the quiet for a long time, the decision in his eyes like a coin launched into a well. Finally, he reached for her hand. It was a collision of two lives tethering through small touch. "I'll fight," he said, "but I'm frightened. My brother will not see this as simple. Yusuf will make lists." "You make lists too," she said softly, "but write the truth in them." He managed a smile that did not quite reach the edges of his sorrow. "I will write the truth," he promised. Outside the room, beyond the palace walls, the machinery of protocol continued to churn. Yusuf prepared his next move, a formal review, more witnesses, the framing of a deportation that would look inevitable if played correctly. Rashid consulted allies, measuring which path would preserve dignity and which would preserve power. Dr. Kamal sharpened his charts and polished his arguments. Inside, Stella folded the letter Fatima had given her and placed it inside the pocket of her uniform. It would be a small proof against the erasure of what she had done. It would not be enough for the council. It might be enough for Ahmad. What's about to come next? A formal hearing will be scheduled, witnesses will be called, and Stella will stand before men in power and be forced to defend not just her methods, but her very right to care. The next decision may send her away, or it may be the start of a war no one expected. If you're with them, like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, because the next moment will decide whether a foreign nurse becomes a martyr or a miracle. Stella had imagined leaving the Khalid royal palace in many ways, quietly, perhaps with a hug from Fatima, maybe with a whispered, "You did good," from Nora. She had never imagined leaving under escort, with the weight of a council decision pressing on her back like a verdict stamped into stone. Her room looked smaller now, too neat, too temporary. She stared at the suitcase on her bed, open like a mouth she didn't want to feed. The first things she placed inside were simple: folded scrubs, the digital thermometer Ahmed pretended never to need, a notebook with medication charts, a pen she'd borrowed from Nora and never returned. Each item felt like a pulse of memory. Then the note. Fatima had slipped it under her door, just as the palace guards had delivered the official notice of suspension and removal. Stella recognized the handwriting, tight, elegant strokes that always looked on the verge of shaking. She opened it. "Forgive us. We are afraid of what he becomes when he loses someone. You were saving him. That is why they grew frightened." Beneath the words, another line alone. His father died the same year as Amira. Yusuf never recovered from either. Stella closed her eyes. That explained the ledger, the fear behind Yusuf's calculations, the desperate need to preserve control. They weren't punishing her for love. They were punishing her for awakening a man they weren't ready to lose again. Fatima knocked softly, then stepped inside with a face like parchment stretched too thin. "They've arranged a car," she said. "You should go soon." Stella nodded. Fatima stepped closer, fingers trembling as she reached for Stella's arm. "I failed you," she whispered. "No," Stella said. "You protected what you could." Fatima's eyes glistened. "He asked for you last night. They told him you were already gone." "I'm sorry." Stella's breath snagged. "He didn't fight them?" "Oh, he did," Fatima said. "Enough that 3 council members lost sleep. But Yusuf made him see reason. They said protecting him meant removing you." Stella swallowed every answer she wanted to give. Words couldn't hold the ache pressing against her ribs. With one last look at the room, the simple bed, the small desk, the window overlooking a garden she never learned the name of, she zipped her suitcase and left. The palace hallways looked different now, lined with eyes that shifted away the moment she passed. Some held pity, some held relief, some held calculation, as if her removal restored a balance the palace desperately needed. Nora met her halfway down the East Wing corridor, hands twisting a cloth. "I told them you never did anything improper," she whispered. But once Yusuf starts a story... Stella touched her arm. Thank you for trying. Nora's voice dropped even lower. He will suffer without you. He already is. Stella's footsteps felt heavier after that. By the time she reached the palace gates, the air outside tasted sharper, colder. Her suitcase wheels clicked against the stone path, each clack hitting her heart like a countdown. Riyadh. International Airport was a blur of movement. Families dragging luggage, businessmen rushing toward gates, announcements echoing through glass ceilings. Stella took a seat near the window overlooking the tarmac, her ticket clutched in her hand. She watched planes glide past like silent promises, places she could go, lives she could return to. But her heart was still somewhere in a palace room she was no longer allowed to enter. She remembered Ahmad's voice that night, cracked and brave. If they remove you, I will resign. She'd told him not to, but she knew he meant it. She stared at her reflection in the glass, the tired eyes, the stubborn line of her jaw. The woman who had walked into a storm and decided to care anyway. She whispered to no one, I wasn't ready to leave you. A final boarding call echoed. Stella rose. A commotion exploded behind her. Shouts, gasps, a thrum of phones being whipped out. Something like a wave of emotion rolling through the terminal. She turned. Her heart stopped. Ahmad, barefoot. His headdress slightly undone, leaning heavily on his silver cane, his breath uneven, his eyes searching through the crowd with an urgency Stella had never seen, not even during his worst panic attacks. His help him. Why is he here? Where are his guards? Ahmad's gaze swept the airport like a man scanning the horizon for a single light, and when he saw her, everything inside him broke open. Stella. Her breath left her. He was walking toward her with no regard for the chaos trailing behind him. Security guards jogging, airport staff panicking, passengers scrambling aside to clear a path. Someone filmed it. Someone else cried. Someone whispered, "This is love." He reached her with trembling breaths. "You weren't supposed to leave," he said, voice cracking. "They lied. They told me you were gone." Her throat closed. "Ahmad, you shouldn't be walking like this. I don't care." He took another step, pain ripping through him, but determination pulling him forward. "You are the only thing that has healed me. And they took you away like you were nothing." Stella shook her head, tears hot behind her eyes. "I didn't want to make things worse for you." "You didn't." He lifted her hand with shaking fingers. "You saved me, and I will not lose you because they fear my grief." People had stopped everything now, phones held up, recording. Children stared. A group of teenagers were already crying. Ahmed sank onto one knee. Gasps rippled. Cameras flashed. Someone screamed, "He's proposing!" He wasn't holding a ring. He was holding his heart. "Stella Briggs," he said, voice breaking beautifully. "You broke every rule they used to cage me. You said Amira's name so I could live again. You carried me through nights I did not think I'd survive." He swallowed. "I love you. I love you in every language my people speak. And I don't want a single day in this life without you." Stella covered her mouth, sobbing openly. "Marry me," he said, not commanding, not begging, but offering. "Stay with me, not as my nurse, as the woman who gave me back my breath." Security guards hesitated. Airport staff cried. Someone live-streamed the moment. The video was already going viral. Stella knelt before him, cupping his face. "You insane, impossible man," she whispered. "You walked barefoot through an airport." "I'd crawl for you," he whispered back. Then Stella kissed him. Gasps erupted. Applause thundered. Someone fainted. Someone shouted, "This is better than TV!" Ahmed clung to her like she was the only solid thing in a world that kept shifting. Stella held him like he was a man made of pain and fire and fragile hope. When they broke apart, she whispered into his cheek, "Take me home." And he nodded, tears slipping silently down his face. By the time they reached the palace gates, the internet had erupted. Headlines exploded. Billionaire Sheikh proposes in airport to his nurse. Clips of Ahmad limping barefoot through the airport flooded feeds. People commented from Brazil, Nigeria, London, Manila, Toronto. The palace was in chaos. Rashid had turned pale. Yusuf held a shaking pen. The council chamber was in uproar, some furious, some stunned, some deeply moved. But Stella didn't see them yet. She only saw Ahmad, fingers still intertwined with hers, as they stepped back across the threshold she'd thought she'd never enter again. His whisper was soft, meant only for her. "I choose you, and now they will have to face that." Teaser for what's coming next. The palace will not stay silent. The council will convene again, angrier, louder, split between tradition and the undeniable force of the people's hearts. Yusuf's deepest fear and deepest love will surface. And what awaits Stella is not acceptance, but the fiercest political reckoning of her life. If you're ready to see them stand against the kingdom itself, like, subscribe, and comment your country right now. The war between love and tradition begins in the next part. They had not expected him to return. When Ahmad walked into the council chamber that afternoon, he did not come alone. He came with Stella at his side, her hand in his like an anchor, and the weight of 1,000,000 phones still heavy in the air behind them. The men who had convened in stately chairs only hours earlier to discuss suspension and procedure now found themselves 2 steps behind a reality the people had already embraced. The chamber smelled of old wood, ink, and the soft, faint scent of orange blossom that seemed to follow Ahmad like a half-memory. 7 men sat like the carved heads on an old gate, faces practiced into patience and judgment. Rashid, sat where he always did, composed and measured. Yusuf, pale and pinched, folded his hands and watched with the tight control of someone counting consequences. Dr. Kamal cleared his throat and arranged his papers as if that could armor him. When Ahmad crossed the threshold, the room's decorum shivered. "You summoned this meeting," he said, voice steady in the way of a man who had chosen thunder over retreat. "I've come to speak." Rashid's lips curved, not quite a smile. "Your Highness, this is irregular." "It's necessary," Ahmad replied. He did not sit. He stood with a kind of terrible clarity. "You were told a story about impropriety. I was told to believe my healing would be a danger to my rule. I have decided that the only danger I will accept is a life lived half alive, so others will feel safe." A murmur flickered. Yusuf's hands tightened. The ledger he had clutched for weeks lay open on the table, like an accusation. He had prepared arguments and testimonies, framed evidence and cautions. He had not prepared for the simple steadying of someone's gaze. Not as an intruder, not as an interloper, but as someone who sees what it looks like to heal. Yusuf's mouth opened like a wound that had been sewn shut too long. "This is about protocol, Your Highness, about the dignity of this office. We cannot let sentiment erode governance." "It is not sentiment," Ahmad said. "It is life." The council's eyes sought Rashid's. He rose, slow and heavy with the weight of a brother's duty. "We had concerns," he said, choosing words like a man stepping on thin ice. "This is not against healing. It is to prevent scandal and instability. The people watch. The council must consider precedents."
Ahmad's fingers curled around the back of a chair. And yet the people cheered when they saw a man choose love over silence. It was Yusuf who finally stood, the color draining from his face. He had always been the ledger, the lists, the ordering hand that kept chaos from unspooling. But there had been a different kind of ordering inside him, one not written on paper. Today, that hidden script fractured into speech. "Enough," Yusuf said. His voice came out rough, as if breaking through something he had guarded for years. "You ask for evidence. You ask for charts. I will give you a confession." The chamber inhaled. Yusuf looked not at the council, but at Ahmad. "When Amira died, everything changed," he said, and the name hit the room like a stone flung into still water. "It wasn't only your grief I watched, Ahmad. It was the way you went away from us. An ocean took you. I watched you lose weight, lose laughter, lose nights until it felt like I was watching you hand me pieces of yourself, and then disappear." His hands faltered. For a moment, Yusuf looked like a sun caught in the middle of a burning house. "I thought if I could control the inputs, your company, your routines, your foods, who visited, you could not fall apart again. I learned to keep you tethered by removing things that would pull. I thought if I kept the cupboard of grief closed and organized, the grief would go hungry." He swallowed. "I convinced myself I was protecting you from falling. I convinced myself control was love." A flashback unspooled behind Yusuf's words. A younger Yusuf, shoulders bent, running into hospital wings. Ahmad, pale and hollow, held by two men as monitors beeped and a priest spoke soft words. Yusuf at the window at night, watching a garden where Ahmad used to walk with a woman whose laugh was in every photograph on a shelf. The memory cut sharp and long. Ahmad clutching a hand, Yusuf whispering in a voice that had to be steady because it was all he had to give. When Yusuf's confession landed, the councilmen shifted as if someone had rearranged the furniture of their assumptions. Rashid's face changed from caution to a raw. "I thought if I sheltered you from risk, I could hold you together. But a man cannot breathe behind a wall built of silence. I built a prison for you and called it protection." Ahmad's face crumpled in a way that made the room ache. "You thought you saved me," he said, voice raw. "You did not save me. You kept me alive but not living. You taught me to be afraid of everything that could hurt me, and in the fear you smothered any chance to heal." Yusuf flinched as if struck. "I did what I thought I had to. When doctors said you might not come back, I held on with the only thing I had. Control. I couldn't bear it, Ahmad. I couldn't watch you disappear like that again." Rashid moved toward Yusuf then, closing the circle of brothers who had loved and wounded one another in equal measure. He placed a hand on Yusuf's shoulder, not as chastisement, but as a touch that said, "I know the weight you carried." Stella watched the scene like someone witnessing a wound being unstitched. Her voice, when she spoke, was steady and plain. "Love does not have to look like ownership. Protection that hides people from life is not protection. It is theft." A councilman with hair as white as the scrolls on his table spoke up with the tremor of age. "Perhaps we underestimated the complexity of what you have been doing, Yusuf." Yusuf's hands dropped to his sides. He bowed his head. "I asked myself for years if I had been cruel for being careful. Today I see I was both cruel and caring. I am sorry. I apologize." Ahmed's eyes were rimmed red, but the brittle shell he had kept for so long had begun to soften. He looked at Yusuf with something like pity and fierce tenderness. "We lost someone," he said quietly. "We all lost her. We learned to be afraid rather than to remember. Yusuf, your fear was born of love. It doesn't make it right." The room stayed silent for a beat too long. The kind of silence that holds decisions in its mouth. Then Rashid spoke, voice steadier now. We have been caretakers, in different ways. Yusuf arranged continuity. Dr. Kamal arranged safety. I arranged for the dynasty. Ahmad, you have arranged to live. The council deliberated in slow, murmured tones. The viral videos had shifted the public's attention into the chamber like an unwelcome guest. People had seen a barefoot sheikh kneel and declare love. The world had cheered. The council could not ignore that force. Finally, Rashid turned to Ahmad. If we accept your position, we must set parameters. The palace cannot be a lawless place. Ahmad's shoulders squared. Then let it have terms, he said. But those terms will not include... We will formalize safety protocols and include the medical board. We will not deport her. Yusuf's face reflected every emotion he had held in for years: relief, dread, shame. He reached out and took Ahmad's hand in a gesture that did not erase hurt, but acknowledged it. Stella felt something inside her chest unclench like a tightened muscle releasing. The council's acceptance was conditional, cautious, and still bureaucratic enough to sting. But it was a start. She stepped forward, meeting Yusuf's gaze. You were afraid, she said softly. But fear makes people shut doors when they should open them. This is a chance to do both, protect and live. Let us make rules that keep him safe, yes, but don't make him a museum artifact. Yusuf nodded slowly, eyes wet and human, the ledger finally small in his hands. I will help, he said. Not to control, but to build protocols that support healing. There was no sudden reconciliation, no tidy forgiveness that washed away years of fear. Instead, there was the messy, honest work of acknowledging harm and choosing to do better. The brothers stood close. The advisor watched with new humility, and Stella stood between them like a bridge someone had finally chosen to cross. Outside the chamber, the world hummed louder than before. The trending tags had not quieted. The palace's move had sparked debates across continents. But within those ancient walls, a fragile consensus had formed. The palace would not lose its ruler to silence again, and it would not eject the hand that had reached into the dark to pull him out. Rashid cleared his throat and addressed the room with the practiced authority of a man who knew the shape of compromise. We will proceed with a 3-month integration period. Stella will remain in the palace. We will convene a medical board, including Dr. Kamal, to formalize practices. There will be oversight, structure, and a clear plan to protect both the Sheikh's health and the dignity of this house. Ahmad exhaled like someone who had been holding his breath for years. He looked at Stella, and then at Yusuf. I asked you all to trust me, he said. Trust me now. Yusuf bowed his head. I will try. Stella, standing with a tired, fierce smile, folded her hands. I will show you how to live again. The council voted, not with the fever of instant worship, but with the careful arithmetic of consequence. The motion passed. Outside the chamber, Fatima waited with a cup of tea and a face that had learned to hold both sorrow and relief. She handed Stella a small note, less a letter than a benediction. You did well, she said simply. Stella tucked the paper into her pocket as if it were an amulet. What's about to come next? A 3-month trial will begin, rituals to learn, flower lists to approve, and the slow, bureaucratic... control, to protect her by trust, will only just begin. If you're still with them, like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching from, because the most delicate work is ahead.
rebuilding a life that was nearly lost. The morning the trial period officially began, the palace seemed lined with invisible measuring tapes. Every gesture, every smile, every cup of tea would now be catalogued and counted. Stella woke with a strange flutter, part nerves, part a stubborn excitement, and dressed in the plain tunic the council had deemed appropriate compromise, something humble enough for palace eyes, but practical enough for a nurse's day. Fatima met her at the door with a small list and a look that said, "I will teach you the language of this place, or I will die trying." "Today," Fatima said, handing over a card, "you will learn the protocol of arrival flowers." Stella read it aloud to herself. 47 stems, specific roses, no lilies, no white chrysanthemums. The list felt absurd. Arbitrary rules about petals and stems. But Fatima's tone made it feel like a sacred ritual. "They measure respect with detail," she said. "Learn the detail, and they learn you are trying." What followed was a montage that felt like training for 2 lives at once. Stella stood in a sunlit room with Fatima, practicing the exact angle at which one must bow when accepting a gift, the length of time one's eyes should meet another's, and how to cradle a silver teacup so it looked like reverence rather than an accident waiting to happen. She stumbled through 2 reheated speeches and mispronounced a patron's name, earning a gasp from a nearby maid and a gentle correction from Fatima. She sat through banquet rehearsals with a list of courses that seemed to multiply overnight. "There are 7 main courses, each with its own fork," Fatima told her. "Do not pick the wrong fork." Stella laughed once, the sound rusty with nerves, and the room softened. Little by little, the sharp edges of the palace's expectations dulled beneath the sturdier shape of her competence. Outside of the rules, the more intimate lessons began. Nora taught her the quiet choreography of the morning, how to fold a shawl just so, how to place a cup across the table without disturbing anyone's rhythm, how to notice when a foot trembled under a robe. Layla watched Stella's awkward attempts at curtsy, and after a week, offered a curt nod that Stella took as earned respect. Fatima became less of an examiner and more of a reluctant ally, sometimes an instructor, sometimes an accomplice in small rebellions, like adding a second biscuit to Ahmad's tray because she could see he wanted it. Those small rebellions became their secret language, the way 2 people on opposite sides of a gulf could exchange a look and know that kindness had been given. Between the ceremonial lessons, Stella and Ahmad moved inwards as if toward the center of a house. Breakfasts became a slow ritual, fresh fruit, a precise teapot. By a stiff movement that became easier each day. They developed private routines that merged palace ritual with practical care. Before bed, Stella would lead simple breathing exercises. 4 breaths in, hold 2, exhale 6. While Ahmad watched the glow of the lamp shift across the suite. On mornings he felt raw, she'd make him walk the garden path with a light, joking that the plants approved of his company. He would shake his head and call her impertinent, but he walked. The intimacy deepened in the most ordinary ways. The careful folding of his robe after a bath, the way she learned the exact temperature he preferred his tea, the way he began to leave an empty seat by the window when she came near. They shared jokes that were small and domestic, his mock outrage at her inability to pronounce the word for a particular spice, her teasing about his stubborn insistence on a teapot that had an odd dent. Humor made space for gentleness, and gentleness made room for the things that had been forbidden, like laughter. Ahmed's progress was not linear. There were nights when his breath would catch and his hands would tremble, and Stella would sit with him like a lighthouse. But the panic attacks became less frequent. Where once he clung to the bottle of pills hidden in hollow spines, now he reached for her hand and for the rhythm she taught. The medical logs, once disputed in a council chamber, began to show a pattern of improvement. Steadier sleep, slower resting heart rate, fewer emergency calls in the night. Each data point felt less like science and more like a string of small resurrections. Yusuf watched these changes with a ledger permanently in his lap and a crease of worry across his forehead. He tested boundaries the way a gardener tests soil, pressing, prodding, measuring the depth of root. He would arrive unannounced at meals, take in a conversation between Stella and a visiting aunt with a silent frown, and then leave with a note typed and ready for Rashid's review. When Stella organized a new medication chart, he requested a meeting, not with accusations this time, but with a list of clarifying questions designed to keep her accountable. "You understand the optics," Yusuf said once, his voice soft as if he was trying to teach rather than admonish. "People watch patterns. They infer meaning." "I understand," Stella replied. "But inference cannot replace evidence. When a man's blood pressure drops because we walked him 3 times a week, that's evidence." Yusuf's expression betrayed conflicting loyalties. To the palace, to the safety he believed his lists secured, and to a brother who was visibly healing. The ledger showed new kinds of entries now, part watch, part documentation, part curiosity. Yusuf's testing began to look less like a hunt and more like a cautious attempt to learn how to guard without smothering. Servants gossiped in whispers that traveled like a delicate current. Some praised Stella for making the Sheikh laugh. Others murmured that nothing good could come from a foreign woman who spoke too plainly. A rumor slipped once about a misstep she had made at a state rehearsal, a wrong bow that Nora's eyes widened. The misstep was small. At a rehearsal meant to perfect the entrance sequence for an upcoming charity banquet, Stella's heel caught on the hem of her dress and she stumbled, nearly sending a tray of ceremonial glasses clinking to the floor. For a beat too long, silence spread like oil. She felt eyes on her, some sympathetic, some sharpened with judgment. Ahmad rushed forward, steadying her with gentleness that was both protection and declaration. "Are you all right?" he asked, voice low enough that the room would not hear the tremor. "Yes," she managed, cheeks flaming. Afterward, voices circled like birds. "She's clumsy, not fit for court. What if she insults the guests?" The misstep became a symbol in certain mouths, proof that she could offend decorum and thus risk the palace's standing. Yusuf watched the ripples and then, to Stella's surprise, asked to see the rehearsal footage. He studied the frames with clinical interest. Then he called Stella into the small study and sat across from her. "You were nervous," he observed. "You should practice the sequence with one of the attendants until it's muscle. The appearance must be flawless for the guests. Otherwise, we provide bait for critics." Stella appreciated the practical tone. "I will practice," she said. "But a stumble should not be reason to throw out the person who reached to steady me." Yusuf's face softened. "I agree. Appearances can kill truth. We will protect the truth." The near failure had tested the trust they'd been building. That night, Ahmad sat with Stella by the window and took her hand. "You handled that as you do everything," he said. "You laughed, you apologized, and you kept going. That is more impressive than perfection." Her throat tightened. "They will always watch for the wrong things. And we will always have to be louder with the right ones," he said. "We'll teach them." Together, they crafted small strategies, more rehearsals, an official card explaining the trial period to visiting delegations, a quiet note from Rashid to the household reminding staff to avoid rumor. They would not be silenced by the palace's old reflexes. Instead, they used ritual to shield truth. The same system that had once tried to bind Ahmad became a structure they could bend toward healing. 3 months were long and brief all at once. The days blurred into practice and progress, the weight of scrutiny a constant low hum. Moments of tenderness multiplied, a hand placed on the back during a long ceremony, a whispered joke to cut the tension before a speech, a lingering look that said more than any contract could. By the end of the second month, Stella found herself less an outsider and more a person who belonged to a complicated, leaky whole. Ahmed's panic attacks had receded enough that late-night vigils were rarer. His smile had more teeth. He started to live side by side. But trust, fragile as glass, is always vulnerable to the hard throw. As the third month approached, a shadow moved in the palace corridors. Someone planting a seed not to save a man, but to sow doubt. A scandal would soon test whether the fragile gains they had made could withstand a targeted ugly whisper. What's about to come next? A cunningly crafted scandal will threaten everything. A leak, a photo, an interpretation that could undo 3 months of progress. If you're still with them, like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from, because the false calm is about to break. And Stella and Ahmad will face their hardest moment yet. The palace had recovered a brittle sort of calm after the trial period. Rituals settled into routines, servants exchanged fewer worried glances, and Ahmad's quiet smiles began to look less like borrowed currency and more like something earned. Stella moved through the halls these days with less of the outsider's stiffness. She had become a practiced hand at both teapots and trembling nights. Then the rumor arrived like a stone tossed into still water. It started with a photograph, blurred, grainy, deliberately framed. It showed Stella and Ahmed in the private library, faces pressed close, his hand on the back of her neck. A second image followed, a close crop of a folded letter with a salutation that read, "My dearest." The image was captioned cruelly. "Plan to marry for influence, foreign nurse exposed." Phones buzzed, screens lit. The palace heard the first low wave of gossip, and then watched it grow teeth. Someone had leaked the images to a popular blogger. Within hours, the images had been amplified, cropped, reposted with commentary. The narrative arrived already formed. A foreign nurse manipulating a vulnerable ruler for power. Ahmad saw the photos before most, the alert on his private line. For a moment, he let himself hope the images were mistakes. Then he saw the angle, the cropping, the malicious hints hammered into the captions. He felt the air thin in his chest. Stella, in the next room, heard the mutter of servants and the distant clack of fingers on keyboards. She touched his sleeve as he stood, the touch a small tether. "We didn't," she started. He looked at her like a man who'd been asked to believe 2 contradictory things at once. "We'll handle it," he said, but the words were brittle. Yusuf's ledger read like a prophecy that morning. He had been careful in his watch, but the images felt like proof to him of what his ledger feared most, that a foreign influence had wormed its way into palace life. He kept his distance at first, folding his hands, making notes, until he could do what he always did, marshal facts. He requested the security footage with a quiet efficiency that felt like a verdict in motion. The first blow came not from the internet, but from within. A slender, anonymous packet of paper appeared on Rashid's desk, intimate, damning, and forged with cruel details. Designed to look like heartfelt confession. The packet included a signed note, the kind of thing that would ruin reputations. Rashid, who had been learning to bend toward compromise, felt a jolt of old fears. Yusuf, who had recorded every deviation in the ledger, finally had a line he felt he could read as proof. He showed Ahmad the letter in private before telling him what he would do in public. "Look at this," Yusuf said, voice low. "I didn't want to believe it, but the pattern is consistent with other deviations. We need to respond." Ahmad read the letter with hands that trembled only enough for the reader to notice. The lines on the page felt like knives shaped by someone who wanted to cut everything they had rebuilt. He handed the paper back without a word. "Who would do this?" he asked finally, the question less forensic than wounded. "You know the court," Yusuf said. "Someone who fears changes will do anything to preserve the old order." Stella, when she learned a forged letter had been used as evidence and the photos were circulating like a contagion, felt a cold clarity that left no room for panic. She had expected smear attempts. She had not expected the ledger, Yusuf, to trust the paper before the person. The sense of betrayal hit harder than any insult. Word at the palace shifted toward containment. Rashid called for counsel. Yusuf prepared a recommendation. Remove Stella again to protect the throne's optics. The staff whispered that the palace could not withstand another scandal. When the hammer fell, when Rashid and 3 council members called for a temporary precaution that would see Stella relocated to a guest residence until the truth could be sorted, Stella considered her options like a clinician weighing triage steps. The political calculus was cruel and immediate. Ahmed's legitimacy was the appearance of impropriety. A palace that survived by appearances would not easily forgive a lens that made it look unsafe. She could fight. She could demand the security footage, lawyers, statements, public denials. But every legal step would draw more cameras, stir more speculation, and perhaps worst of all, put Ahmed in the center of a storm while he was still healing. So she chose a different kind of sacrifice. In the Great Hall, before cameras, some official, some not, and before the council that had once voted her a trial period, Stella stepped forward. She requested permission to speak. The silence that followed was thick enough to slice. "I will leave," she said plainly, voice steady. "Temporarily. If my presence creates risk for the Sheikh or the house, I will step away so that healing can proceed undisturbed." The room inhaled as if 1,000 held hearts were dropping. Stella saw Yusuf's face shift, a micro-expression of confirmation that his ledger had been right. He believed the paper. He believed the photos. He believed what he feared. Ahmed's jaw clenched, and for a heartbeat she thought he would refuse her decision. "You cannot do that," he said, words a raw mix of command and pleading. Shifted. Rashid's eyes narrowed, but there was respect hidden there too. Stella had weaponized humility. She had put on the mantle of the guilty party to take the heat while protecting the one she loved. The palace prepared a staged removal. Stella's belongings were packed. A car waited. Staff bowed with ritual precision. Nora pressed a small packet into her hand. Fatima's note folded within, then stepped back, eyes wet. "You saved him," Nora whispered, "even if they cannot see it now." As the car drove away from the palace, cameras followed. The internet lit with commentary. Nurse flees alleged scandal. Is the Sheikh being manipulated? The narrative had been made and fit for consumption. But the act Stella had chosen, public, sacrificial, politically readable, did not silence Ahmad. If anything, it forced him to act. He had watched the procession of the car from the palace gates with fury like an animal's. Yusuf's betrayal, however reasonable, hurt him deepest because it came from the man who had been his anchor. But the world's eyes were open now. The lie had teeth. Ahmed immediately demanded full access to the security archives. He ordered his private staff to hand over cameras, timestamps, and the digital chain of custody for the photo. He called in the palace cyber team, small, composed technicians used to a certain kind of secrecy, and insisted they trace the image origin. He spoke like a man who had finally decided the only appropriate response to deceit was exposure. The tracing began. Camera footage from the corridor the night of the photo showed a different angle. Light at an oblique that made a private, ordinary conversation look intimate. In the footage, Ahmed reached to steady a stumbling Stella at a rehearsal, hands on shoulders, not lips on neck. A security camera showed the book that had been staged for photos sitting on a bench, pages moved, a shadow of fingers that did not match Stella's. The timestamps revealed a gap, an edited jump that spoke of deliberate manipulation. Ahmad pushed further. The server logs contained a trail of anonymous logins the night before, the same IP addresses routing through a hidden proxy used by a bitterly resentful courtier known for old alliances. The cyber team traced the edits back to a terminal in a wing that belonged to an ally of an ambitious noble who had long bristled at Rashid's growing compromises. When Ahmad confronted Yusuf with the footage, projected large in the council chamber like a truth that could not be ignored, Yusuf's face crumpled. He had trusted paper and pixel. He had not checked the chain. The ledger he loved had made him human in the worst way.
"I'm sorry," Yusuf said then, voice small. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to protect you."
Ahmad listened, and the room held its collective breath.
"You made lists to keep me," Ahmad said softly, "not to harm me. But lists are only as good as the light that reads them."
Did not erase weeks of suspicion or the damage to Stella's public image, but it exposed the perpetrator, a rival faction intent on preserving an old order by any means. Ahmed did not wait for the council's wrath to fall on the rival. He marched through the palace, past marble and chandeliers, to the wing where the terminal sat. The accused, a courtier with smooth hands and a practiced smile, tried to maintain dignity as Ahmad barged in, security at his heels.
"You orchestrated this,"
Ahmad said, voice cold but controlled. The man's eyes flicked to the screens. There was no denying the edits now. He stumbled, tried to insist on a misunderstanding, but Ahmad released the evidence like a guillotine.
"You endangered my life for power," Ahmad said.
"For that you will answer." Publicly, the palace moved faster than the blogosphere expected. The courtier was placed under investigation. His alliances crumpled like stale paper. The forgers and the photo editor were identified. The chain of custody made the fabrication indisputable. The pictures that had started the scandal were pulled back. Apologies were issued in tight, careful statements. But the damage had been done. Stella had left the palace, the footage had been seen, and the public taste for scandal lingers. When Ahmed found Stella that evening in the modest guest house where the palace had put her, he did not come with rhetoric. He came barefoot, an echo of the airport, and he came with a single, unarguable truth. "I should have trusted you," he said, voice raw. "You offered yourself to protect me."
"I failed you by letting anyone make that sacrifice necessary."
Stella looked at him, exhausted and steady. "You did what you thought would keep me safe," she answered. "But the people who feared you too much wanted us both to live the lie." He fell to his knees then, not as a gesture of proposal, but as a man humbling himself. "Come back with me," he said. "If they want a fight, we will give them the truth." "And if they want a martyr?" she asked. "Then we will carry no martyrs," he said fiercely. "We will carry each other." Yusuf knocked on the door a moment later, hesitation written all over him. He stepped inside and placed a small hand on Stella's shoulder, offering a quiet, flawed apology. "I believed a paper before a person," he said. "I am so sorry." Stella accepted his hand with the same dignity she had shown the world. Forgiveness would be slow, trust would have to be rebuilt. But the varnish on the palace's old reflexes had been peeled back, and the light had shone rot where suspicion had thrived. What's about to come next? The scandal has been exposed, but the palace will demand restitution, formal public vindication, a vote, and the final reckoning in the council's chamber. Stella and Ahmed have proven loyalty. Now they must prove it to the house that rules them both. If you're still with them, like, subscribe, and tell us where you're watching. The council chamber looked different this time. Not because the chandeliers were brighter, or the carpets newly washed, but because the air no longer hummed with fear. Something had broken open in the palace, an old door, a taboo, a lock rusted shut by grief, and now slight moved through the cracks like dawn. Stella walked beside Ahmad as they entered, not behind him, not escorted by guards. Side by side, equals walking into judgment. The councilmen rose as custom required, but even their stiff, ceremonial posture seemed altered, less rigid, less ready to strike. Rashid cleared his throat first. "Let us reconvene," he said. "This meeting will determine the final standing of Nurse Stella Briggs and her future in this house." There were no whispers this time, no clicking pens, no covert glances to security cameras, only the awaiting of truth. Yusuf stood from his seat. Not the calculating figure with the ledger he'd been for years, nor the accuser from the days before the trial. He stood as a younger version of himself, boy who had once spent nights guarding his brother's door, terrified of losing him. "I want to begin," Yusuf said, "because the failure was mine." The room stilled. He looked at Stella first before turning to the council. "I believed forged evidence," he admitted. "I believed a lie because I feared losing Ahmad again. I was protecting my brother in the only way I understood. Control, restriction, isolation." His voice cracked. "But that was not protection. It was harm disguised as duty." A murmur of agreement ran through the room. "I failed to trust the person who was healing him," Yusuf continued, eyes glossy. "And I failed to trust Ahmad's capacity to choose life again." Rashid shifted, as if relieved someone else had finally said aloud what weighed on all of them. Dr. Kamal rose next, awkward, stiff, trying to straighten his coat as if he could press out his own guilt. "I owe an apology as well," he said. "I dismissed Nurse Stella's methods because they did not fit the traditional framework. Modern therapy, emotional grounding, non-pharmaceutical intervention. I treated them as threats instead of tools." He bowed, deep, sincere. "But I watched him heal. Not in charts or lab reports, but in the way he walked, the way he breathed. The palace owes Miss Briggs more than apology. It owes her gratitude." Stella let out a soft breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Ahmed squeezed her hand under the table, warm, steady, no tremor. Rashid looked between them. "These words matter. But we must still address the question. Does the council approve a marriage between Sheikh Ahmed Khalid and Stella Briggs after the trial period? And under what terms?" The old Stella, the one who arrived, sacrifice, scandal, and love, stood instead. "I would like to speak," she said. The council granted her the floor. "I came here to do a job," she began, "and instead, I learned a culture, a family, and a man who had forgotten how to hope. Your rules were hard, your eyes were sharp, and your grief was heavy." Ahmad's breath hitched. She continued, "But I am not here to replace your customs. I am not here to erase Amira. I am here to help Ahmad live again. To support the man you all say you love, and if you allow it, I want to build a future with him where honor and healing can stand side by side." Silence hung like incense, sweet, heavy, expectant. Rashid looked at Ahmad. "Your Highness?" Ahmad rose. He did not stand like a man making a political argument. He stood like a man stepping into his life again. "I have governed through pain for too long," he said. "Through fear, through walls Yusuf built, and I reinforced. But Stella showed me that strength isn't measured by silence, or loneliness, or tradition without heart." He looked up, unflinching. "If this council approves our union with conditions, I accept, so long as those conditions reflect respect, not punishment." The chamber shifted, uneasily, thoughtfully. He added, voice firm,
This palace will not lose her. The vote began.
One by one. Approved with a 6-month cultural integration review. Approved with shared oversight between medical staff and cultural council. Approved with acknowledgement that Stella Briggs must maintain her medical credentials here. Approved with conditions. Approved. Approved. And finally, Rashid. Approved. Unanimous. The word hit like a soft thunderclap, gentle but life-changing. Ahmad exhaled sharply, shoulders shaking once. Stella pressed her hand to her heart. Yusuf bowed his head into his palms, relief pouring out of him like water from a broken jar. The marriage would be sanctioned, on Ahmad's terms, with Stella's voice included. The palace was no longer the old palace. Weeks later, the Khalid royal palace felt warm. Servants laughed more freely. Gardens were tended with new pride. The old wing where Amira's photographs had gathered dust was opened, not erased, not forgotten, but honored. Stella insisted on it, and Ahmad agreed. In their private quarters, Stella and Ahmad sat cross-legged on the carpet, a map of the future laid out between them, half-scribbled plans, half-quiet hopes. "What about a clinic?" Stella asked softly. Ahmad smiled in that small, rediscovered way, soft at first, then blooming. "Yes," he said. "Here, in her honor, and for the life we're building." Fatima passed by the doorway, pretending not to listen, then winked so dramatically Stella burst into laughter. Later that night, Ahmad and Stella stepped onto the balcony overlooking the lantern-lit courtyard. The world still watched, they always would. Cameras, drones, curious citizens. But none of that mattered now. Ahmed reached for her hand. "You changed everything," he murmured. "No," she whispered back. "We changed everything." Below them the palace glowed, not cold marble, but living light. People moved, voices rose. A home, not a shrine. Ahmad turned to Stella. "I vow," he said quietly, "to live, to choose joy where I once chose silence, to honor what was lost, but not be ruled by it, and to walk every step with you, without fear." Tears shimmered behind Stella's lashes. "And I vow," she replied, "to stand beside you, to argue with you, to laugh with you, to keep you grounded when your crown gets too heavy, to love you without asking you to forget." Their foreheads touched. The palace breathed. The world watched. And two people, once broken, once burdened, began again, hand in hand, alive, together. If this journey moved you, if you felt every heartbreak, every sacrifice, every victory, like this story right now, subscribe for more epic love tales, share it with someone who needs hope, and comment the country you're watching.